Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Before I get started, I want to give a special shout out to a new Oscar tier Patreon member. A huge thank you to Megan L. for signing up for bonus content on Patreon. Megan, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And if you are interested in learning more about the bonus content available, I will share information at the end of the episode. In honor of the Christmas season, today I'll be covering another actor who I always think about when I think of Christmas films. James Stewart. Yes, he did almost 80 movies of an incredibly wide range, but we cannot deny the importance of It's a Wonderful Life and the loveliness of The Shop Around the Corner, two of Jimmy Stewart's many greats. Let's dive in. James Maitland Stewart was born on May 20th, 1908, to parents Alex and Bessie Stewart in the small town of Indiana, Pennsylvania. He was the oldest of 3 children in the family and the only boy. Alex Stewart owned a local hardware store, and Bessie was highly involved in their community and their church. I should note that the Stewart's hardware store was not just a little hole-in-the-wall shop. It was a huge store and had been a very important part of the community starting in 1853 when Alex Stewart's father and uncle opened the business. James Stewart later in life described it like this, quote, "The Stewart hardware store seemed the center of the universe. It was a 3-story structure full to the rafters with everything needed to build a house, hunt a deer, plant a garden and harvest it, repair a car, or make a scrapbook. I can conceive of no human need that couldn't be satisfied in this store. Even after I grew up and moved away and saw larger sights, the store remained with me. But then I realized that what was central to my life was not just the store, but the man who presided over it, my father." End quote. When he was a child, James Stewart's mother, Bessie, called him Jimsy, and father Alex called him Jimbo. Both Bessie and Alex were extremely proud of their son, but especially Alex, both before and after fame. The two would always have a really, really close and special relationship. The Stewart family sounded like an idyllic small-town USA family. They had a strong faith, were pillars of the community, and cherished their time together. The Stewart family went way back in Indiana, Pennsylvania. James's younger sisters played violin and piano, and he played the accordion and piano. Evenings would be filled with music in the Stewart home, something that was very, very important to Bessie. Alex Stewart was said to be a very warm and emotionally nurturing father, something that is common now, but it wasn't so common in the early 1900s. He was open-minded and very supportive of all of his children. Alex and Bessie set high importance to education and the arts. They were in the mindset in raising their children that just because they were from a small town, they should not and never be small-minded. Part of this included my favorite type of education, travel. Alex believed that seeing the country was very important for his family. I grew up in much the same way. We traveled all over the United States, and reflecting on that as an adult makes me very thankful to my parents for giving us those experiences. And Jimmy Stewart felt the same way about his childhood experiences. Travel provides an education in life and culture and history that cannot be achieved in a classroom. And I'm saying that as a teacher. A few things young Jimmy Stewart was intrigued by as a child, just to give you a picture of what kind of kid he was. He loved elephants, horses, magic tricks, the accordion, and aviation. He was a curious and cultured child, and his father Alex was happy to nurture all of his child's interests. It was aviation that Jimmy was mostly interested in. He had big dreams of becoming an esteemed pilot. James Stewart worked at the family hardware store during his summer breaks from school, but when he was 13 years old, he wanted to try something different. He landed a job as a projectionist at a local movie theater, and he loved this gig since it meant seeing movies for free. Alex Stewart came from a long line of patriotic men, so when World War I began in 1917, he thought there was nowhere else he should be than fighting for his country. He was 45 years old. The Stewart family held their traditions tight. James attended the same prep school as his father, where the 130-pound, 6'4" Beanstalk played football and ran track. I'm surprised he wasn't snapped right in half playing center on that football field. He also worked on the yearbook committee as the art editor, sang in the choir, played his trusty accordion in the school orchestra, and acted a little in the drama club. It's a cute story of chance, actually, at how he got into the accordion. A circus worker from the traveling circus showed up at Alex Stewart's hardware store one day and asked to pawn off his accordion for some cash. Alex, the stand-up guy he was, wanted to help the man, so he bought it off of him. James saw it and thought, why not? I'll try that thing. And the accordion would forever be a huge part of his life. After prep school, James went on to attend the same Ivy League college as his father in 1928, Princeton. Fun fact, Princeton at the time was still a school for only white Christian men. No women, no black people, no indigenous people, no Jewish people. White Christian males only. Don't even think of applying if you weren't that. Oh, and there was a driving ban. Students of Princeton were not allowed to drive vehicles because driving away from campus led to trouble, and we can't have that. Students were allowed to see women every now and then, though, when young women were bussed in from a nearby women's college for Princeton dances. They even had an assigned patch of grass outside the dance hall if the young couples wanted a little time outside together. But don't get too wild because that patch of grass was heavily chaperoned. While James was away at college, the family hardware store was tragically destroyed in a fire. It was a devastating loss for the entire family, the whole community really. But as strong as the Stewarts were, they were able to rebuild and their legacy would survive and thrive. James Stewart began his Princeton career working towards an engineering degree, but as it turned out, he was not good at math. The advanced algebra and calculus courses kicked his butt. So Jimmy decided maybe engineering wasn't for him. Too much math. So he shifted gears to architecture. Aside from his coursework, he played his accordion in the Triangle Club, he ran track, he worked on the school newspaper, and he performed on the stage. He hadn't really wanted to act. He didn't mind playing his accordion on stage, but acting didn't really appeal to him. But he was persuaded to do so by others, so he did it. James Stewart graduated from Princeton with a degree in architecture in 1932, and he did so well that he was awarded a scholarship to continue on to graduate school. But guess what was going on outside of the prestigious grounds of that Ivy League college? The Great Depression. It just wasn't ideal for him and his family to continue on to grad school, scholarship or not. And not the greatest time to be joining the workforce either. Not too many opportunities for architects when people couldn't even afford to keep the roofs they already owned over their heads. Well, James still had his trusted accordion. And since he dabbled in that stage work in college, he thought he would do a little entertaining while he waited for professional opportunities to become available to him. He joined the University Players Theater Group on Cape Cod, Massachusetts the summer after college, and he was going to be a musician for the group. He and his accordion. Two people in particular in that theater group the summer of 1932 would become lifelong friends to James Stewart. Henry Fonda and Margaret Sullivan. Which, fun fact, they would end up married to each other, Henry Fonda and Margaret Sullivan. Well, Henry Fonda would go on to having 5 wives, but Margaret Sullivan was the first one. James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan would star in a few movies together down the road, including the great The Shop Around the Corner. And Henry Fonda would forever remain Jimmy Stewart's very best friend. The University Players hit the big time in the fall of 1933 when they were given the chance to perform on Broadway. The production was going great until Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the repeal of Prohibition. Then everyone jumped out of their theater seats on Broadway and bellied up at the nearest bar, very thirsty after that long dry spell. Most of the university players headed back to Cape Cod, but a few loved that little taste of Broadway and decided to stay in the Big Apple. James Stewart and Henry Fonda included. They moved into a small apartment together where they hosted a weekly Thursday night beer club. Things seemed to come pretty easily for James Stewart. He slid right into some great roles on Broadway without trying much at all. His friend and roommate Henry Fonda was pretty pissed about this, because he was out auditioning like crazy for parts, while Stewart would just walk into a producer's office and be offered a part, no audition needed. He just had that presence about him that stuck out from the others, and producers liked the uniqueness they saw and heard in him. That voice is undeniably unique. And then, pretty quickly, he caught the eye of Hollywood talent scouts. 27-year-old James Stewart, a man raised to become a working professional and educated in architectural design, was suddenly on a train bound west for Hollywood in 1935. And he signed a contract with the best studio in Hollywood, MGM. Things must have turned around for Henry Fonda by now too, because he had also just arrived in Hollywood and was put under contract with 20th Century Fox. So the two buds moved in together once again as they both embarked on the next chapter of their acting careers. Stewart's first official Hollywood film was The Murder Man with Spencer Tracy, and he would crank out a whopping 21 movies between his arrival in Hollywood in 1935 and the end of that decade. He worked with the greats, Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, Joan Crawford, Spencer Tracy, Ginger Rogers, Myrna Loy, Marlene Dietrich, and his old friend, Margaret Sullivan. Directors loved his different look and different sound in their films, but one thing MGM studio execs wanted to change was his weight. Most budding stars get to Hollywood and are forced to lose weight, but Jimmy Stewart was told he needed to gain it. He was 6'4" and 130 to 140 pounds. That's really thin. So he was sent to the studio gym and set on a mission to bulk up. As Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda's notoriety grew, they became pretty well-known eligible bachelors on the social scene. They would double date frequently with stars like Olivia de Havilland, Loretta Young, and Ginger Rogers. According to the Jimmy Stewart biography, when asked about the numerous women on his arm, Stewart would simply reply, "These women were great dancers, and I love to dance." So we can take that literally, or we can read a little between the lines. It's not uncommon for studio execs to find a role for their contracted players and cast them over and over and over again in that same type of role. It was all part of the movie-making factory system they used. You just don't mess with a well-oiled machine. But James Stewart proved to have so much diversity in his acting ability that he would end up performing in everything from comedies to dramas to musicals to westerns. He was an actor with incredible range. He was known to be able to play anyone, and he played his parts with such relatability that it didn't look like acting at all. It was authentic and real. As the James Stewart biography narrator said, quote, "He grew larger than life by being down to earth, playing the everyman as the leading man," end quote. Biographer Donald Dewey said in his book, quote, "Stewart's motion picture work encompasses a vast emotional and intellectual territory that few other actors have dared enter, let alone negotiate successfully. It is arguable that no other U.S. screen performer, and certainly none of the stars from the big studio era, male or female, have shown as much range or delved into as many emotional nooks and crannies," end quote. Dewey specifically referenced Stewart's later work. We'll get into that in a bit. Jimmy Stewart first worked with famed director Frank Capra in 1938 in the film You Can't Take It With You with Jean Arthur. The movie went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. James Stewart and Jean Arthur teamed up again with Frank Capra the following year for another smash hit, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Stewart's performance in that movie is incredible. So incredible, it landed him an Academy Award nomination. He unfortunately didn't take home the statue that year, but he did win the New York Film Critics Circle Award for his performance, and the movie won the Oscar for Best Writing along with 9 other Oscar nominations. The 1930s were indeed great for James Stewart, but he would prove even more greatness in the 1940s, in a much different way we'll soon learn. First of all, he finally got that highly coveted Academy Award that slipped out of his hands the year prior with the 1940 mega hit, The Philadelphia Story, with superstars Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. I watched this movie not too long ago. Such a good movie. Katharine Hepburn handpicked Jimmy Stewart for this film. So anyways, he snagged that Oscar for Best Actor for his work in The Philadelphia Story. And a cute story about that Oscar. James said his father called him shortly after he got home from the Academy Awards ceremony. He and his shiny new statue. His father said to him, "I heard on the radio they gave you a prize or something. What is it, a plaque or a statue? What is it?" Jimmy described the Oscar statuette to his father, and his father replied, "Well, send it home to me and I'll put it in the hardware store window." And so he did. Jimmy Stewart's Oscar for The Philadelphia Story stood in his father's hardware store window for 20 years. When James Stewart accepted his Oscar at the Academy Awards ceremony in 1940, he said, "The statuette should have gone to Fonda." His best friend Henry Fonda was up against him for that Best Actor Oscar for his work in The Grapes of Wrath. And Jimmy Stewart valued his friendship with Fonda much more than an award. He was incredibly proud of his friend and wanted him to be awarded for his greatness. 1940 also gave us one of the Jimmy Stewart movies that make me think of him when I think of Christmas, The Shop Around the Corner. I love this movie, and it of course was the inspiration for the 1990s super hit, You've Got Mail. James was able to team up with his old pal Margaret Sullivan in this film. I also recently watched this. I covered both this movie and another famous James Stewart Christmas movie you may have heard of in my bonus episode for this month. Now, with his huge Hollywood paycheck, Jimmy made his lifelong dream come true. He bought his very own airplane. His airplane wasn't just for fun and thrills, though. Once the threat of Nazi force began to intensify in Europe, Stewart began getting as many flight hours in as he could so he would be ready to fly for his country. He wanted to be a combat pilot. In October of 1940, Jimmy Stewart put his career on hold at the very height of stardom to join the United States Air Force. He was so determined to protect and serve his country that he joined the military over a year before the attack on Pearl Harbor that signaled the U.S. entry into the war. As was his case in his arrival in Hollywood, though, the Air Force said he needed to gain some weight. So he hit the gym and ate a ton of tuna sandwiches because that was his favorite food. I wonder if it was still his favorite food after eating 10 of them a day. Well, those tuna sandwiches worked, and he just barely passed the weight requirements to be eligible for combat service. Before he left for Europe, his father slipped a note into his uniform pocket, accompanied by a copy of Psalm 91. The note from his father read, "My dear Jim boy, soon after you read this letter, you will be on your way to the worst sort of danger. I feel sure that God will lead you through this mad experience. God bless you and keep you. I love you more than I can tell you. Dad." I think you can see how incredibly proud Alex Stewart was of his son. James Stewart flew 20 combat missions during World War II. And for his extraordinary bravery, he was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. According to the United States Air Force Personnel Center, the Distinguished Flying Cross is awarded to any officer or enlisted person of the Armed Forces of the United States for heroism and extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. Both heroism and achievement must be entirely distinctive, involving operations that are not routine. So, James Stewart did some pretty brave acts to deserve that distinction. Other stars would end up joining the military in their duty to their country. Stars like Clark Gable, Paul Newman, and even B. Arthur and Marlene Dietrich. Don't worry, I'll cover those remarkable stories one day too. But James Stewart was the first. Stewart devoted his entire life to his country until the official end of World War II. He returned a different man in September of 1945. He still had the good heart and the strong values that were so deeply a part of him they could never be ripped away. But the war matured men in a way so unique it couldn't be achieved any other way. James Stewart returned to the U.S. with the ranking of colonel, and he would remain in the Air Force Reserve until 1968, earning his ranking up to brigadier general. Before his enlistment, he had been making over $11,000 per month from MGM. During his 4-year enlistment, he made $21 per month. But that didn't matter to him. The money wasn't what was important. His duty to his country was. So, of course, this is where that other iconic Christmas movie enters the picture. It's a Wonderful Life. James Stewart had seen some pretty horrific things during his 4-year absence from Hollywood. And he wasn't the same person who had originally left Tinseltown a few years earlier. How could he be? The realities of war were vivid in his mind, and he wanted to diversify his work to show the world that not everything is frilly and happy, as Louis B. Mayer was so famous for showing at MGM, his little dream world. Well, James Stewart had seen the nightmares of life, and he wanted to step out of that dream world and into the realities of life. So when his friend Frank Capra, who he had loved working with in the past, invited him over to pitch an idea to him, he was in. Capra himself stopped mid-description of the plot of It's a Wonderful Life and said, "This doesn't sound very good, does it?" But Stewart said, "It does, and I'll do it. When do we start?" Stewart said, quote, "It's what a true motion picture should be. It takes a tiny but very important idea, in this case, the idea that you're not born to be a failure, and developed it into a whole movie," end quote. It's a Wonderful Life is a dark storyline with a happy ending. Many people think of that happy ending when they think of the movie, but there are some really dark but important moments that get us to that ending message. James Stewart didn't have to reach very deep to pull off those dark, depressing moments in the film. He had some demons after his experiences in World War II, and those demons were closer to the surface than he could control. He was going through a very difficult time mentally and emotionally during filming. Yes, it helped him give an outstanding performance, but it's really sad to think of the struggles that he was enduring during his return to typical life. That outstanding performance earned him his 3rd Oscar nomination. A few years later, on August 9th, 1949, one of Hollywood's most eligible bachelors went off the market. 41-year-old James Stewart married a former model named Gloria Hattrick McLean. Gloria had 2 sons from a previous marriage, and Jim instantly became a devoted stepfather to them. To get a sense of what kind of catch Gloria was and why James Stewart fell in love with her, Carol Burnett put it into words for us in the James Stewart biography, and we always listen to what Carol Burnett has to say. She was a classy dame, in the best sense of the word, probably one of the most beautiful women you'd ever want to meet, and funny, so funny. You could just see the sparks between them. The family of 4, James, Gloria, and the 2 boys, became a family of 6 on May 7th, 1951, when they welcomed twin girls into their family, little Kelly and Judy Stewart. Gloria Stewart recalled that her 2 sons from her first marriage were treated exactly the same as the children they had together, that Jim was a wonderful father. The Stewarts didn't live the fancy couple about the town, glamorous Hollywood life. They lived a normal, quiet family life, just like any other family in 1950s America. Well, maybe with just a little fancier house and a little fancier things. The decade of 1950 is when viewers saw yet another major shift in the James Stewart they saw on screen when he began making westerns. But he still did comedies and dramas, he played Glenn Miller to perfection, and even The Greatest Show on Earth that required him to be dressed as a clown for the entire movie. And then, of course, the Hitchcock movies. He really showed the world his great versatility and his acting abilities. Jimmy's mother, Bessie, passed away in 1953, and with her passing, he became even closer and more protective of his father. The father and son had always been incredibly close, but this loss brought them even closer. Jim cherished every single moment with his father, knowing how precious time with him was. Alex Stewart developed cancer and died 8 years later in 1961. And at his funeral, Psalm 91 was read, the same scripture he tucked into his son's pocket as he left to serve in World War II 20 years earlier. Alex Stewart had proudly run the family hardware store in Indiana, Pennsylvania until he was 88 years old. James Stewart continued to show his amazing range on screen throughout the 1960s. As put so perfectly in the James Stewart biography, the star aging as gracefully as the characters he played. In the late 1960s, Jimmy and Gloria's oldest son joined the United States Marine Corps to serve in the Vietnam War. Jimmy was so proud of him for serving his country. Military duty was immensely important to him. In 1969, Jimmy and Gloria embarked on a USO tour, and Jim shook over 12,000 hands. And not one of those 12,000 hands was a burden to him. He was very proud to personally thank each and every one of those men for their service. He even offered to call the family of servicemen he met once he returned to the U.S. to let them know that their loved one was alive and well. Seriously, he was an absolutely wonderful human being. Jimmy and Gloria were able to see their son on their visit as well, and that visit would prove to be more precious than they ever could have imagined at the time. A mere 3 months after that visit, Lieutenant Ronald McLean was struck down by enemy forces. He died for his country at the age of 24. It was a heartbreaking period for the Stewart family, as you can imagine. James Stewart said later in life, quote, "He wanted to be a Marine, and I encouraged him. I thought it was wonderful. And he became a good Marine. And on the field of battle, he conducted himself in a gallant manner, and I don't think that's a tragedy. It's loss. It's terrible, terrible loss. But tragic? No. He died for his country," end quote. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Jimmy Stewart continued to knock out incredible work on the big screen, the small screen, and even made it back to Broadway. One notable performance was a 1983 HBO movie called The Right of Way with Bette Davis, about an elderly couple's joint suicide pact and their belief in a person's personal right to die. I will definitely be watching this if I can find it. I bet it's incredible. Stewart and Henry Fonda had remained best friends through it all, ever since they were young men in their early 20s. They supported each other through triumphs and heartbreaks for decades, for their entire lives. They grew into men together. It was a truly, truly special friendship, which made it all the more shattering when Henry Fonda died in 1982. In 1983, fellow actor and now President Ronald Reagan presented James Stewart with the Distinguished Kennedy Center Honors. And in 1985, James Stewart received an honorary Oscar in celebration of a half a century of extraordinary work in the film industry. James Stewart was an absolutely amazing person. Aside from his incredible work on screen and his courageous sacrifices to his country, he was very giving in philanthropic work with various causes and very active in animal rights activism. He and Gloria even went on a mission to Africa to support animal rights. They were both just really, really good people. Jim and Gloria had something truly special. Not too many Hollywood marriages stand the test of time, but theirs did. They always prioritized their relationship and their family. Jimmy's family came first, and the movies came second. Many stars get that backwards, but not Jimmy Stewart. The love of his life was torn away from him in February of 1994, when his wife of 44 years was taken by cancer. As said in the James Stewart biography, quote, "Friends remembered that Jimmy always felt that Gloria could do no wrong, and he never tired of telling her how wonderful she looked," end quote. He loved her so deeply. A part of James Stewart died when he lost Gloria. That kind of loss creates a hole that can never be filled. A deep hole you always physically feel. After the loss, he retreated from the spotlight and lived a life of solitude in the home he and Gloria had raised their children in. His surviving children and their families visited frequently, and he spent his days reflecting on the greatness his life had held. He had experienced so much heartbreak, but yet he had so much to be grateful for. In this family home, on July 2nd, 1997, 89-year-old James Stewart slipped away from this world peacefully in his sleep. He was with his father again, his son, his best friend Henry, and the love of his life, Gloria. The world had lost a true legend and a remarkable human being. Now, I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Another great Golden Age actor, Robert Mitchum, died the day before James Stewart. Bullet point number 2. Walter Matthau served under James Stewart in the Air Force, and he had nothing but truly great things to say about him. Bullet point number 3. This is really cute. I saw an interview with Jimmy Stewart when he was recalling the 1936 film Wife vs. Secretary with Jean Harlow. He said, "We were working on the goodbye scene and we were going to kiss goodbye. And at the end of the rehearsal, Jean kissed me. Well, I'd never been kissed like that before. She really let me have it. She was a good kisser." Bullet point number 4. As I mentioned, Jimmy and Gloria valued their private home life and wanted to give their children as typical an upbringing as possible. Well, on one occasion, a group of tourists arrived and set up a picnic on the Stewart's front lawn. Ballsy. Well, Jimmy Stewart responded in a wonderful Jimmy Stewart way. He wasn't one for confrontations, so he simply emerged from his home, turned on the sprinklers, and returned inside. Message sent. Bullet point number 5. I had always heard James Stewart referred to as Jimmy Stewart my whole life, I feel. As you probably noticed, I referred to him as James a lot in this episode, and sometimes Jim. That is because I read somewhere along my research that James Stewart hated being called Jimmy. However, his family, including his wife and close friends, referred to him as Jimmy in interviews that I saw. So I just don't know how much truth there is to that. If it is true, I am truly sorry to you, Mr. Stewart. In conclusion, James Stewart rose from idyllic beginnings with a strong foundation of faith and values. And he never lost those values or his strong faith, even as he transcended into a life as far separated from his small hometown as a person could get. The glittering lights of Hollywood. Everyone loved Jimmy Stewart. Everyone who ever worked with him loved him. His friends and his family adored him. He just seemed like a man that you couldn't find one bad thing to say about. He was indeed admirable. We can't thank the Great Depression for very much, but really, if it weren't for the Great Depression, Jimmy Stewart would have continued on to grad school and set out into the world as an Ivy League-trained architect. He would have lived a comfortable and simple life in New England, and none of us would have ever known of his existence. But fate had other plans for Jimmy Stewart. And with that, the world was graced with 5 glorious decades of entertainment that simply would never have been the same with anyone but James Stewart. He was in a league of his own. James Stewart reflected on his career like this: "I think it's wonderful to have been able to give people little pieces of time they can remember." And wow, did he do a remarkable job giving that to us. Thank you, James Stewart, for showing us how important and powerful strong values and a good heart are. That no matter how important a person becomes to the world, those values do not need to be sacrificed. In fact, they become even more powerful, because you were able to show the world how impactful those values and your kind heart can be. You made a difference, not just in your work on screen, but in your contribution to the military, your incredible philanthropic ventures, and my favorite, your devotion to animal welfare. You were simply a good person. Thank you for being a good person. And thank you all for listening. If you are looking for an extremely last-minute Christmas gift, consider the gift of bonus Stars of the Golden Age content. If you have a loved one who loves old Hollywood, give them the gift that keeps on giving. Extremely fun bonus content of all things Golden Age. Megan L. did it, and you should too. She'll now be able to listen to this month's iconic Christmas movies from the Golden Age bonus episode, plus the 2 I've already posted, and all the future bonus episodes as long as she wants to stick around. Plus, she's part of the Movie of the Month Club, where we all watch a movie each month. I do a bonus episode about the movie, and we can all chat about it on Patreon or Discord. Plus, she got a Stars of the Golden Age sticker and access to the aforementioned Discord chat rooms where we can talk all things Golden Age. Doesn't that sound pretty sweet? Isn't Megan a lucky gal? Well, you can get all those perks too by signing up on Patreon. Like I said, this month's bonus episode is about iconic Christmas movies, and next month's bonus episode topic will be about the history of the famous Hollywood sign and Griffith Park in Hollywood. So there are some really great topics that you don't want to miss. Head over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to learn more, or you can subscribe for just the bonus episodes through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Megan, thank you again so much. And Merry Christmas, everyone. I appreciate you all so much. My main source for this episode was a book titled James Stewart, A Biography by Donald Dewey. I also used the Jimmy Stewart Museum website, jimmy.org, an ABC Nightline special report episode from July 2nd, 1997, the Biography Channel biography of James Stewart, an interview with James Stewart for the Kennedy Center Awards, the United States Air Force Personnel Center, and My Little Christmas Elf, IMDB.